Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Exceptional Relationships. I'm your host, Jason Safford, founder and CEO of Exceptional Results Now, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Ronique Clarke, our Exceptional Relationships coach. And Ronique, today we're talking about standards versus expectations. What are we talking about? What is the difference between a standard and an expectation in a relationship?
Well, standards. I actually had a discussion about this the other day. So standards is usually something that you're not going to compromise on. That's the criteria. Expectations is something that you can adjust over time. So you can compromise on those things. So in relationships, regardless of whether it be business or romantic or friendship, you have to recognize the difference between what is someone's standard in terms of what's the criteria that you will not compromise on, and the things that you can compromise on. And you have to learn to know the difference, because when you don't know the difference, a lot of things can be a lot more complicated than it really should be. And a lot of things can be misconstrued. So it's very important from the jump for you to at least know exactly what your standards are, what your value systems are, and also what things that you can potentially compromise on in a partner, whether it be a relationship or business or even friendship.
Would that be something akin to boundaries in terms of
Yes.
standards? Okay,
Mhm.
because if I'm listening to you correctly, boundaries and standards are very similar in that you're making sure that you let somebody know
Yes.
what are your specific needs in
Hmm.
order to interact with someone, as well as protection
Hmm.
that, you're basically saying, hey, look, this is the way that I operate. And if you can't meet me where I am, I don't want to do this because
Wow.
I've been certain places and this is my comfort level. And, this
Hmm.
is where I want to stay.
That's true. And it's
And
very important to have those discussions.
is expectations more in the realm of, I guess, dreams and sort of looking at the future opportunities together and sort of, setting goals and then measuring how
Yeah.
you do when you're going towards those goals?
Yes. So when you are so based upon we were talking about before in terms of vision of the future, when you're planning out those goals, you will say, okay, some people will say they want to, for argument's sake, have children by the time they're 40. That is their expectation, right? But the standard thing is for them to have a suitable person to have children with. That is a standard. They're not going to compromise on that. So what you find is that for that particular expectation, you have to discuss with your partner, and you have to decide, okay, can you meet that particular expectation based upon what your value systems are and what you want? So it's a lot of communication, it's a lot of knowing who you are and what you want. And it's a lot more about, and also it's a more about listening to your partner and listening to their needs and their wants and where they want to go in life. And then you can figure out how exactly it is you can smudge yourself into that life.
And it brings up I just heard you say that it's about listening to your partner. And it brings
Mhm.
up a very important point, which is that if you're not listening to your partner in terms of their standards,
Mhm.
obviously, you're not even going to get a chance to work on expectations because
Yes,
you
exactly.
missed you missed a point. So standards is obviously critical to listen to. You have to
Yeah.
be aware and cooperative, and I think you also have to accept if these standards are something that you want to go along with,
That
because
is true.
everybody's standards are different.
Our
Number
difference, yep.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think number two is the fact that we often may mistake standards for expectations,
Yes.
because for a lot of people, I think that they go into the idea that these standards could be changed.
Yeah.
And that's a flaw or a failure on
Yes.
ourselves to
Mhm.
recognize.
Yes, that is why it's important for you to know exactly who you are and what your value systems are, and come and be accepting of that and live in your truth. So when somebody comes to you and say, okay, I want to be with you, you are able to say to them, okay, these are my standards and these are my expectations. So, as I said before, standard and expectations, you have to know the difference. So, standards are something that you're not going to compromise, no way, no how. You have to meet that.
Right.
Expectations, there's leeway,
Right.
because you can't be too rigid, because everybody is different. Everybody has their own way of doing things. So you must also keep that in mind when you're interacting with people. So when it comes to expectations, you have to make sure that you're listening to what their expectations are, and then you can communicate in terms of, okay, I can compromise on that, I can not compromise on that, which ultimately turns into a standard, depending on what your belief systems are, and vice versa. So it's all about listening, it's all about communication, and it's all about compromise, and
Okay.
what you are willing to give and take for the other person.
I'm going to
And
throw you a curveball.
what happened?
Now, you
Mm-hmm.
know that, I'm all about personal development and growth. And
Mm-hmm.
what if somebody's standards change based on their personal development and growth?
That's a good,
So,
that's a good thing.
but what
That's
if
a
it impacts the other person in what they feel is a negative way, because now the other person's standards, you know, what I'm talking about is the fact that our standards are rigid until they evolve.
yes.
So in other words,
Have to evolve at some point, because I'm very sure your standards were different when you were a teenager as opposed to now. And I'm very sure that my standards were very different 10 or 15 years ago. So as we grow and as we develop and as we change with new experiences and meeting different people and having different lives, your standards are gonna change, but those are for you. But in terms of, but when you're welcoming somebody into your life, you have to go with what makes you happy on the inside, as well as outwardly. And certain things you can't compromise on.
and if I think about it from my own perspective, what
Mhm.
you talk about is that, our lives kind of, we go on this roller coaster where we have high standards, and then based on, someone that we meet, we may lower them for that person. And then
And
after, we go higher with our standards after that ends. And then when we meet somebody else, it goes lower again. And
yep,
then, it's a roller coaster ride based on when you meet somebody, how flexible you are on
yep,
your standards going forward. And this brings up another point, which is circumstances.
that's
So
true.
sometimes you may have a standard. Let's use honesty,
Yeah.
simple one. Most
Yes.
people have a standard about, honesty, and they don't want
Mhm.
to deal with somebody who lies to them.
Ah.
But you get into the relationship, and eventually you deal with the person lying to you. Now, this isn't uncommon. Why? Because all of us have a fear of telling the truth sometimes,
Yeah.
out of thought for the other person. And we
Yep.
don't want to hurt their feelings, or we
Mhm.
don't want to deal with the drama. So therefore we don't tell them everything. And sometimes we tell them things in a very fragmented way.
A fragmented way. Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of times some of us, some women, and I know I've been told throughout the years that it's not everything you must talk about. So a lot of us were taught to not tell certain things because we don't want to offend anybody. So we have to say certain things in such a way that we don't offend.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times it does more harm than good, and you have to be careful of that.
Right. And the other side of this is that, again, what you may think is protecting the other person or protecting the relationship, because you may think that whatever it is inconsequential or not necessarily of major importance. The other person may have a focus on it.
You want it exactly.
That's right. And they magnify it. And now the issue between the two of you is that you are now forced to look at that standard.
Yeah.
And whether or not it really applies, again, one person feels misled. The other person, feels like, but I was doing this, for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And you get into a very, very murky area, or, foggy.
It's a very gray area when it comes to that. But as I said before, we have to do what is true to us.
So when it comes to, again, standards, the issue then is you have a choice. If you want to apply your standard and say, no, you've deceived me, this isn't going any further.
And also not only deceiving the other person, but you're deceiving yourself as well. Because you have a standard and you went against it. So if you can do that, that means you can compromise yourself for anything else, depending on the situation. So you have to at least make sure that you're not doing that. So that's why I say, stick to your standards. Yes, expectations can be adjusted, yes, but standards, no.
And when you talk about expectations, and this is just the other side of the coin, is that now you're getting away from sort of the critical issues of what you must have in order for yourself to be comfortable, to the things that you ideally want to have with the other person. And the challenge there is that there's a third party involved with expectations, and that third party is called life.
That's true.
And life doesn't compromise in terms of what life wants.
And that is why, in terms of expectations, we have to be willing to be flexible when it comes to expectations. Because if we're not flexible with expectations, that is when we put ourselves in a corner and we watch our lives pass us by.
So, it's very easy for somebody to lower their standards in order to accept somebody for their mistakes until the person continues to make mistakes. However, it's more difficult to raise your standards with someone unless you really are willing to, walk away to a certain extent and sever ties and say, look, you're not giving me X, Y, Z, and I'm walking away until you can give me that, or I can find it from somebody else. And that is very different from, I think, a lot of people who walk away because they say, we were supposed to get a house together, or we were supposed to get a car together. We were supposed to, do something together that, and people often choose to walk away from dreams where they'll break up or they'll go in different directions because something didn't work out the way they wanted it to. And they'll lower their standards. So people have it backwards, I guess. Is that correct?
In a way, In a way, because I have heard so many people talk about, oh, we should have gotten a house, we should have gotten this at this by this time. But the thing about it is you have to be flexible. You have to understand that life doesn't go around. Life doesn't go that way. You're not going to be you're not always going to be in a situation where you're going to get everything that you want at the time when you want it. But you have to be in a place mentally as well as emotionally to accept that, okay, I am on this journey, and whenever the time comes for me to get a house with this person, it will happen. But at least the person is in my life. The person is treating me well. The person is satisfying my soul, satisfying my mind, as well as other things. We'll get to that part later. And I'm just going to enjoy the moment and enjoy the present. Because if we center our minds too much on the future and the future doesn't come, that is when things are gonna go awry. And that is a lot of people put themselves in compromising situations when it really doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, and I think that, again, for our listeners, one of the important things that I'm really hearing from you is the fact that where we should not be so flexible on our standards, unfortunately, far too many of us are willing to be flexible on our standards because we're more focused on the expectations with the person. And we're hoping that they'll change once something, changes in the situation. So as we get closer to the expectations or in the dreams, whatever it is, we're hoping that somehow this will cause a change in the person and their standards, and that somehow we'll able to help them lift their standards
but the
to
thing
meet
about
us at our level.
But the thing about it is people don't change. People adjust their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
People adjust their behavior to suit the situation of the moment, but people don't change.
Right.
All right. So with that in mind.
Now, when you say people don't change, what you're saying is that people don't change their standards and their value system unless they work on it.
Yes. So it's really dependent on the situation, because a lot of times people will quote unquote change to suit a particular agenda. And we see it all the time. Mm-hmm. We see that people will step into interactions with people and say certain things and behave a specific way just to suit the other person, when they know within themselves that, okay, this is not me, but I'm just trying to do this to meet a need, right? So what is one thing that we all must look out for? Me included. And you know what, just at the end of the day, we have to just make sure we're all being truthful, and we have to all be truthful and be respectful of others and be respectful of others' needs and wants. And if you need something from somebody, you make it known, and the other person should have enough respect for you to say, okay, I can do this or I can't do this. Mm-hmm. And you take it from there and you decide, okay, where are we gonna go?
And my guess is that, in listening to you, that the biggest problem for people in having this conversation is the fear that it's going to separate.
And
it's that fear and anxiety of being without the other person.
Yep. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is, if you have to have this sort of discussion and you feel you have that feeling of fear, that person really isn't really, the person might not even be for you in the first place, because you should be able to be comfortable enough with them to be frank with them, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just listen out for your own conscience, and listen to your gut, and listen to what your spirit is saying, is trying to set you, because usually, well, I shouldn't say usually, all the time, it will not steer you wrong. Never. Well,
this brings up another point, which is the fact that you just touched on something, that the person may not be the right person for you, but I'm gonna say, what if it's the fact that inside yourself, because you've never dealt with this, you may or may not have been through, difficult experiences prior to, you've never confronted yourself about, can you live, comfortably by yourself or without the other person? And you don't know how. You have to first learn how to have that conversation with yourself.
Exactly. Oh, yep. That's why I say you have to be true to yourself. And in order for you to be truthful with others and about your standards and your expectations and what you need and want, you have to confront yourself. And you have to face the ugly realities of yourself and accepting of that and living that and go through your emotions. And at the end of it, you'll realize, okay, this is who I am. These are my weaknesses. These are my strengths. This is what I will tolerate to make me feel comfortable. This is what I won't tolerate. And if I'm going to have somebody around me, I have to make sure that whoever it is understands that and understands me, because I understand me.
Now, if you're willing to adjust for another person, in other words, you tell somebody, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. But over time, as you develop a relationship with somebody, you're willing to adjust. You see that they might have different standards. Your standards don't quite align with each other. And this has nothing to do with expectations, but because of the person overall, the relationship you developed with them, you accept that you don't necessarily have the same standards in terms of what is specifically important to each one of you, but you respect each other's standards, where you don't necessarily try to compromise, but you adjust your own standards in a way to meet the other person where they are, because you see that they're not necessarily trying to take advantage of you, or you think, or I should say, you think they're not trying to take advantage of you.
Yeah, exactly. So that is what sometimes you can potentially do. That's dependent on the person.
Right.
And what they want and the sort of what they're bringing into your life and what you are bringing into theirs. And you can look at all of those factors and then you can say, okay, maybe the standards can be lowered a little bit. Maybe I can compromise on X and Y for this person, because this person is bringing so much to my life and I'm bringing so much to this person's life. I want to build something. So let me sort of take it down a notch a little bit. Just so this, I meet this person where they are. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, here's the curveball, which is, how do you know whether or not you're being manipulated by the other person?
Well, usually it is a situation where they'll try to, I'd like to say, make you feel bad for having the sort of standards that you have, for having the sort of expectations that you have, and them telling you that you need to do this, or I can't do this, so you have to do that. And the real thing about this, that is usually a situation where they're trying to put you in a corner, so you are accepting mediocrity. And I don't think that anybody should accept it. Well, I don't know with anybody else. I don't think I would.
Well, and the goal here is, obviously we want to help people have exceptional relationships. So it is a matter of saying
excellence. You're not going to have excellence right away, but you strive for it. Right. And anyone who is putting you in a position where you feel as if you need to settle for mediocrity does not deserve you and does not need to be around you. Because if you are taking the steps to confront your realities and to confront the ugly sides of you, to make yourself a better person, that person should be able to be on that road with you as well, and take their own steps to confront their realities and to confront the ugly sides of them, and for them to be whole, if you will. So anybody who isn't trying to go with you on that journey, tell him to go. Go.
All right. Last question. From the standpoint of standards and expectations, how do we guard against those people who recognize how to get us to lower our standards by using our expectations against us?
Why? That's a very, very slippery slope, But usually the signs are there. The signs are there, and usually we all have a little thing called intuition.
Mm-hmm.
We all have a little thing called gut feeling, and it is very important to listen to those things and to listen to our intuition and to listen to our own personal Jiminy Cricket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our own personal Jiminy Cricket. Yes, I'm doing a little Pinocchio. I'm doing a little Pinocchio.
So listening to your conscience, and also what I really hear you saying is that you have to be mindful at all times. So even though you learn to trust and feel comfort with the other person,
always be
mindful of yourself in terms of just how comfortable and trusting you are of the person that you're with, and not to be like, oh, they're purposely deceiving me, but to recognize that if you're beginning to do things that you wouldn't do in other situations, unless the circumstance truly provides a reason for you to compromise in a way that it's like, okay, in this particular situation, this actually makes sense. But in most cases, if the other person is influencing you in a way that causes you to question yourself.
Yes. Exactly. That is not somebody who should be around you.
Right. That's what we have to be aware of.
Okay. Exactly. We must always be mindful of those sort of people who are around us, because those people are there. Those people are always there.
Ronique, any last words for your listeners?
And always let your conscience be your guide. That's my last word for the day today.
That's awesome.
For the day today.
All right, everyone. This has been another episode of Exceptional Relationships with Ronique and Jason. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.
Mwah, mwah. Lots of love.